go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ask Anything presented by Moser Consulting. I'm your host, Daniel Leon, Moser's Director of Personnel. We're glad that you're with us for this episode of Ask Anything because today we're diving into one of the most transformative forces in modern technology, the Internet of Things, or IoT. From smart homes and connected cars to intelligent factories and wearable health monitors, IoT is redefining how people, devices, and data interact. Our guest today is a returning guest, John Caviness, who has written extensively about IoT's role in healthcare, specifically how wireless sensing technologies can improve patient outcomes, streamline operations, and make care more responsive. Wireless Sensing for Healthcare Solutions, published through IEEE, explores how integrating sensors and communication systems can help solve long-standing challenges in the industry. But IoT's influence goes far beyond healthcare. It's reshaping entire sectors, unlocking efficiencies, and raising important questions about security, privacy, and human impact. But before we get to all that, let's welcome John Caviness. John, how are you?
Doing great. Super glad to be back, guys. I know it's been a while, but happy we could take some time on, I think what is it, Halloween today to talk
It
about all
is
this?
Halloween today.
Yeah.
It's the reason for my orange shirt. I normally would not wear orange, but yeah, it is Halloween today. Yeah, John is kind of like in the Ask Anything Hall of Fame. I feel like if we ever come up with a Ask Anything Hall of Fame, he would certainly be like probably the number one in the draft.
If you haven't won the MVP award yet, I'm sure you've been in the run. There it is, the most valuable
Yes,
podcaster
Yeah.
award. Indeed. There
yes.
we go. Yeah.
So it's good to have you back, John. Let's start big picture. When we talk about the Internet of Things, what does it really mean for how we live and work today? How do you define IoT in practical terms?
IoT is a really interesting term because it's buzzwordy in a way that makes people engaged, but it's kind of a simplification, right? So what is IoT in like the simplest terms possible? It's devices that typically don't have an IP address connecting to a network and doing something. We're all exposed to like smart fridges, there's
Mhm.
laundry machines. You can get Bluetooth updates, wireless updates on how your laundry is going, right? Those are all like kind of simple examples of IoT. But my favorite is, all of this is inspired by sci-fi. Automatic doors, for example, kind of fall in that realm if they're not using pure sensing technology to know when to open. But if it's like tying back to a RFID system to check a badge or something, there's usually some network backend there. But the interesting thing about IoT now, right, when I wrote that paper, was it was all very new. While it's still quite up and coming tech this many years later, I think it was 2018 when I wrote that, it's developed a lot since then. Partially because certain industries benefit highly from implementing these things, and also security has gotten a lot more headwind behind it on making the right architecture for this to work. There were a lot of early concerns about, well, if you're just adding all these devices to your network, you're adding a larger attack surface. There's better ways to protect them now and keep them separate from other things on the network. But like simply put, IoT is a device which is typically not connected to a network, now being connected to a network for a purpose. So, when you think of industries in particular that might benefit from an IoT implementation, there's a lot of talk around healthcare historically. The paper I wrote was kind of coming from a personal space, right? A family member of mine often has to go to a hospital once a year. And as we all know, hospital bills are not cheap, right? And most of that time spent is not actually for the care and the treatment, it's just for monitoring. The goal of my paper was to paint a picture of the future where maybe the procedure gets done, and then the aftercare monitoring, so to speak, can be done remotely, right? If the infrastructure is there, the devices are there, and the resources from a people standpoint are available. Maybe that's a benefit to all involved, right? Less people in hospital beds, more people having jobs, and, smaller bills after getting treatment. But, beyond just healthcare and life science, the wearable market has grown significantly, but there's a lot of implementations that don't necessarily require it to be attached to a person. If you look at like kind of manufacturing and kind of industrial IoT, implementing IoT devices can help with predictive maintenance, so sensors detecting anomalies before failure, process optimization, quality control, and supply chain visibility. Historically, automation has had a limitation of all that happening, right, in some form or fashion, either manual or automated within a non-networked mechanism. But now there's the capability to do those things with a network back end that allows for that data to be processed in real time, not just after the fact. If you look at like smart cities, in my time in Europe, I came to notice that there's this interesting thing. The car will recognize often the speed limit of the place you're in because they have sensors on a lot of the signage that tells you, okay, you're going too fast. Like specifically in Germany on the Autobahn, there's parts where there's no speed limit and there's parts where there are, and your car will kind of flash a little sign at you saying, hey, like you can speed up if you want, or you should probably slow down because there's a limit here. But even beyond that, right? Traffic management. A lot of the infrastructural backend for traffic signaling is old. That being said, I know there was a news article in the recent past where a kid hacked into the traffic system, and I think Ohio made it better, got in trouble, and everyone was like, you should probably give that guy a job, right? Not necessarily punish him, right? But that being said, that's only one potential use case in like a city or, smart city infrastructure. There could be things around environmental monitoring for air quality and for noise. In a larger city, if you've ever lived in one or know someone who has, there's a lot of just kind of latent background noise constantly happening, right? There's pollution. So having those kind of networked sensors to get readings, levels, and have the ability to make decisions based on them would be really interesting to see happen. Within retail, you see a little bit of this today. I think it's still in its infancy, but like smart shelving and inventory tracking, immersive experiences leveraging like augmented reality, I think is something that people love to talk about and some places have implemented. I believe there's a lot of that in certain Asian countries, but automated checkouts, things like that could be results of implementing IoT in those kinds of environments. And one of my favorite industries where I think this could have a lot of power is in the agriculture and environmental scene. I remember years back, I was researching how drones were impacting agriculture. And they had essentially created, for lack of a better term, a nose for this drone to be able to fly over a field and get a sense of whether or not the plants were healthy, the release of CO2, the air quality was supporting the growth of the plant life. If you take that away from a drone, put some sensors inside the soil, you could have weather linked irrigation. You could have a different way of livestock monitoring to help maybe reduce the amount of water being spent on
Crops and things like that. Yeah.
crops and things,
Yeah.
right? I know Indianapolis has a few, I'm gonna forget the term, but like there's a couple of companies out there that I think are doing like in old warehouses, they've made these like fresh greens, vegetation growing capabilities.
Aquaponics.
Aquaponics, right?
Aquaponics. Yeah.
Aquaponics,
Yeah.
Yeah.
hydroponics is the water to think.
Yeah.
Aquaponics is usually like it's a fish tank where the roots go into there, and then the one I'm familiar with, they had like tilapia. They're
Yeah.
growing like so they're feeding food to the fish and the plants, and then the byproduct of that from the fish provides nutrients in the water that gets sucked up in by the plants, and
Yeah.
it's like a whole closed system.
Yeah, and in those closed systems, there's a lot of benefit to having this type of technology in place to get you those readings, have that metering capability, and be able to use that data in real time or over time to collect trends and make better decisions about how you're doing it, right? To be more efficient, maybe more productive. But there's all kinds of ways where this approach to use of technology could make a big difference. There's a lot of projections out there about how big of an impact this could be to the global economy, not just the US economy. A couple out there will say it's about 14 trillion across the world by 2030. Other people might forecast it closer to 26 billion in just the US market until 2029. So the stakes are large on the, financial side. There's also quite a bit of complication that comes with putting these things in place. Historically, there's been a very clear line between operational systems and IT systems. Now that things have gotten more networked, for lack of a better term, those lines have blurred. So what historically might have been, I don't know, a director of operations responsibility in a warehouse has suddenly also become shared with the IT director at a,
Mm.
manufacturing place. So those responsibilities have sort of collapsed into two of them. So there's a lot of like impact and changes that are going to emerge with this sort of
Right.
technology being adopted more widespread, even in like homes. I know a lot of my friends are nerds, as you can guess, because I work at a tech company and I'm a nerd myself. Yeah, shout out to the nerds, right?
Shout out to all of us.
There's some that have their house completely, they have dashboards on their phone to know how their AC is doing, how
Yeah.
much their cat litter box might have in it and may need to be cleaned,
I
right?
haven't gone there yet.
Yeah, there's some folks that are there, right? They know when their laundry's supposed to go. They know every single maintenance task that
Not
they
there
have to
either.
do through. There's folks that have their home set up to the point where they get alerts about what needs to happen and then they go deal with it. So even from a personal life standpoint, this has already started to maybe impact individuals as it's already impacting larger markets too.
I view it as a change for the good. I mean, obviously, everything you mentioned from all the applications that we could certainly talk about that this has impacted. The home environment one is actually one of my favorites because I'll use this one as an example that might be simple and silly, but it's actually an important one, like your water fridge filter. That's one of
Yeah.
those things that if you have an old style fridge, that basically you have to wait for that light to light up. If you're not paying attention to that, you can just basically open up the door every day, not look at it, and keep drinking that water from that filter that's been in there probably for a year and you won't notice. But like you
Yeah.
said, I have a smart fridge, bought it, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. And one of the things that I actually appreciate about it is that reminder that it pops in my phone every 4 months, like, hey, your water filter is I don't know, 40% through. And I'll tell you a quick story. That's how I found out that my water softener in my house stopped working.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't realize it probably for a couple weeks, didn't realize it. And then all of a sudden I got one notification from the fridge saying that, hey, your filter is at 50%. And I'm thinking to myself, why is it at 50%? I just switched it off. I think it was not even 2 months had passed.
Yeah.
So then I kept that in the back of my head. And then a week later, your water filter is down to 30%. I'm like, all right, something's wrong. Because why would it go from 50 to 30 in 5-6 days?
Yeah.
So then I switched it, and I don't know why it came to my head. Let me go check the softener, make sure that there's enough salt, etc. I remember the last time I put salt in it, so I was like, wow, what's going on? I go down there, and yeah, it wasn't working. It stopped working, God knows for how long, and so we hadn't noticed it. I guess through coming in contact with the water, we hadn't noticed it yet, but we caught it because of the fridge. Another simple thing that you might think, oh, that's simple, but the fridge also alerts us when the door is open. Like if
Yeah.
somebody, like one of my kids, I've got young children, so if they go in, open the door, or maybe they open it and leave it open, or they close it and they thought they closed it, but it's still like open, it's gonna vibrate on my phone. It's like, hey, the door open. It's like, oh God. All right. So which one? Yeah. So those sorts of things, I really find them as useful as anything else because it helps me make sure that my appliance is running good, that it's actually doing its thing, and that I'm actually doing the service that I need to do as a user, right? As a consumer, because I don't want my water filtering device to actually go bad, because that
Yeah.
Lord knows how much that's going to cost me to repair. So, so yeah.
But there's a lot in your story there, right? Say without the smart fridge, right? It would have taken you longer to notice the problem, which
Yeah.
means there would have been a turnaround time impact on you getting it fixed, right? Just at a
Right.
high level, that alone is a
Yeah.
big important point with how this could not only affect individuals in their residences, but also large scale implementations. On the micro level, often there's some broader version at the macro level. But I think it's also interesting because like this might be a tangent, but like I got a new car finally. I was driving this 20-year-old bucket for quite some time, right? When I got it, one of the craziest things to me was the fact that it can send an alert to my phone that my tire pressure is low. I think that
Yes.
is crazy. right?
Mhm. Yep.
That's a very small win, but that has an impact on your gas mileage, how fuel efficient you're being. So even little things like that, right? And that's one of the big like guiding points that I think is important to kind of give while we're here. People will always look at new tech as how do we make these huge sweeping changes that are going to make the most impact, right? The same thing is happening with Gen AI right now. There's a lot of big visionary goals out there when more often than not, starting small and scaling smart is going to have a better impact. And, if it's a financial situation, return on investment, focusing on the outcome rather than just the technology, right? That's why, there's this joke one of the professors told back in the day when I was learning about this initially, all those years back, that don't buy new tech because it's shiny, buy it because of what it can do. And that kind of has always stuck with me because I feel like every 5 years historically, but now every 3 months, we get some kind of new development in the tech world. You have to kind of check and see like, okay, wait, is it just shiny or is it actually going to have a broad impact? And here's the dark side of IoT. Though network security has gotten stronger from a availability standpoint, right? There's better systems out there now to secure and maintain a network. Humans are still prone to mistakes and overlooking things, and that can seriously open a lot of bad doors in relation to implementing this stuff. Security first is a big important taking away message from anything with IoT. Because think of it this way. Let's say you've got a warehouse, you implement a fleet of sensors, there's this whole infrastructure behind it. Maybe it's virtually segmented away from production systems other than what it needs to talk to, for lack of a better term. That could be used as a jumping off point from an attacker if they were able to get in, right? Or they could use the information that they could get from that system to inform on, here's a part in the schedule where they work where maybe I could do something, right? That kind of adjacent intelligence is often very valuable to an attacker. So it's tricky to compensate for what that outcome could be as well as what the risk could be. And the advice is simple. You really have to make sure that planning for the security around those operations starts on day one. Like as soon as, listeners, if you're considering going down an IoT journey, that's going to be your biggest hill to climb at the outset. How do I make sure that this thing is going to be secure to do, right? Because the outcome could be massive, but there's also that risk.
So I want to put a pin real quick on security because I feel like we can definitely go down this rabbit hole and kind of spend a little bit more time there. But I want to go back quickly to the impact that IoT is having, whether it's in business, cities, or we talked a little bit about daily life. Let's talk into the business side of things.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that impact that IoT might have on a business?
Since it is kind of an emerging technology in a way, right? It's not mainstream to the point where every business has it. Some of the impact there can be very like parallel to what Gen AI can do for an organization. Add efficiency, productivity, and reduce time waste. With that also, there would be financial cost. I do have a client that has some IoT in their environment. That stuff is not cheap. There's this kind of interesting philosophy out there in the hobbyist world with IoT that is often reflected in the, kind of more retail commercial side of it, where you kind of have a couple routes. You can either build it yourself, go buy some Arduinos, figure out how to program it, maybe get a more elevated ESP model or some kind of board essentially that has all the fixings, if you will, to connect back to a network and start from scratch. So basically build your own house approach. Then there's kind of this hybrid where, maybe you buy a platform, but it's not configured to do exactly what you need it to do, and you have to set that up. That for a business can be costly because one, you have to have the talent to do that work. Two, you have to probably budget for that, right? From a time and money standpoint. But you're at least set up in a sense where you're not doing all of it from scratch. You're at a starting point that you can build off of. And then there's kind of a third one where you're you would look to a company who specializes in making specific devices and systems for a specific use. There's a lot of that within the logistics and manufacturing sector where there's entire companies devoted to just how do we make a warehouse more efficient based on IoT devices being involved. Often there's a little bit of overlap with automation, so actuation of things, not just sensing things. Like you can look to the Amazons of the world, if you will, in how they might have sensing technology in their warehouses, robotics, and things like that, right? Where they're constantly collecting this data, which kind of leads me to the next big factor for a business. Having more data is more power in decision making for your organization. So most of this data is going to come through at a high volume, likely be fairly disorganized, and need some sort of refinement in order to be able to be actionable from. I would be shocked if there's a lot of platforms out there that do that right out the gate. Maybe there are. But the additional factor that brings to the business is, okay, so we implemented this cool, shiny IoT setup in our warehouse, for example, because I'm picking on manufacturing. All of this data is available to us. Now what? So the kind of advice there is you'd have to have a data strategy in relation to your IoT strategy to get the most value out of it. That's where you then have to figure out, where does that data end up living? How do you ingest it into something? How do you present it? And kind of establish those maybe dashboards or visuals that help audiences within the organization use that data for some kind of decision making, right? Is it, oh, we need to buy more product, or we need to adjust our manufacturing like line times in some way based on what we're seeing? Or
Mhm.
maybe this component that we've been purchasing from this place, when compared to that one time they couldn't get it to us and we had to go somewhere else, somehow we were more efficient with the component we got from somewhere else. Well, that's interesting to see. Oh, also the one that we got that was from somewhere else was a little bit more expensive because we needed it in a rush. But if we were to sign a deal with them, maybe we get it at a better deal and also have a better result from it. So there's a lot here, right? I could go on, but hopefully that kind of gives you a sense of like some of the business implications of what IoT brings to the
Yeah.
table. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Definitely it's good, right? It can definitely have, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But at the end of the day, I think that when we're looking at this and the impact that it can have for your business, I think you should definitely look at it from a positive perspective and the things that it could do to actually make you more efficient and just a better processing in general for your business. So definitely agree with you there. So let's go back to then privacy and security, because data and connectivity are at the core of IoT. I mean, that's basically what they do. They just get data and they connect the things. But they also raise concerns about privacy and security, as you were talking earlier. What are some of the biggest challenges that organizations face in safely adopting IoT technologies?
The consultant in me wants to say there's a lot of it depends here, right? But like simply put, the data privacy, liability, safety, and standards are evolving across all the industries: healthcare, industrial, utilities, manufacturing, name one. So regulatory risk is kind of high with these. Since it is a newer tech, it isn't going to fit one to one in every currently written policy that exists out there. It's going to kind of float in this gray space. That being said, say it's healthcare, say HIPAA, there are ways to anonymize data. There's ways to implement these things where it doesn't have any private healthcare information involved. It depends on what you're implementing, right? So
Right.
say you're an oncology center, say you implement IoT to monitor the levels of chemo being used, not necessarily in relation to who's sitting in the chair.
Mm.
So tracking more of the physical materials and the logistics around that versus the human element, which is usually the part where regulation is very important. And then away from the privacy side, more on the security side. I kind of alluded to it earlier. There's a lot of risk with implementing these kinds of devices. One, because depending on what approach you take, right? If you're building it yourself, that means you're responsible for making sure it's not vulnerable. If you're doing sort of that middle ground where you get a platform and you're configuring it, much like other things that are similarly deployed, maybe the vendor has a responsibility on vulnerability management, but then you as the business that implemented it and configures it, you have a responsibility on the vulnerabilities that might exist in your code. And then if you fully adopt some vendor-driven product IoT implementation, you're having to trust that they're doing the right things with their product and constantly updating it, right? So that alone, from a business standpoint and a risk tolerance standpoint, can be very difficult to compensate for. It's much like what you see with Gen AI at the moment, where companies are starting to be thrust this technology, sometimes in ways that they didn't even ask for from their vendor of choice. And maybe they don't have a data policy. Maybe they don't have an AI policy, but suddenly AI has already been introduced to the environment. Beyond that, there is, a couple of like guidance points there, right? Zero trust for IoT. So making sure that authentication and validation of all systems on a network is monitored and enforced would be an essential part of the recipe. Here's a interesting thing to think about. If you were to go back 20 years, the amount of network devices for any given organization is probably pretty low. Cell phones weren't as, you couldn't just hop on the Wi-Fi. There probably wasn't Wi-Fi. The amount of devices that had to be looked after, maintained, authenticated, and trusted were lower. And now if we think about right now, 2025, everybody's got a cell phone in their pocket. Most businesses have a guest Wi-Fi of some sort. Sometimes businesses operate in open Wi-Fi, which has its own risks on its own. Even a small business can have, at any given moment, up to 150 to 200 devices that are on the network. So having ways to make sure that if it's connected, you know exactly what it is and what it can get to. Knowing that, okay, this sensor on our production line only has a single path it can take and one handshake it can make with an authenticated credential to do its task is essential. So there's a lot of risk as far as what could be, but there's a lot of ways to prevent those risks. It's just a matter of effort put into it and, having a good plan. I think the last thing that nobody likes to talk about with this stuff is there's a bit of a data governance thing there. Depending on what type of data is being sensed, what kind of direction it takes, where it goes, who can get to it, what even is that data, it's going to have a broader impact on, say if you have a certain compliance requirement that is very specific about what you are and aren't allowed to do with data, right? And where it lives. For example, GDPR is a good one to pick on, right? There's a lot of rules around that. As far as if it's data from the EU, it's kind of got to stay in the EU, right?
Yeah.
If you were to have an IoT implementation and host the data somewhere else, that could be in violation of some kind of compliance. So there's this whole architecture of complication that comes with IoT. Even though the impact can be very large, it's quite a hill to climb, right? Which is why it's not mainstreamed in the past, 7 years since I wrote that paper. A lot of what I wrote in there, and I wish I had a copy of it still nearby, was focused on the dangers of this type of technology not necessarily being a reason against it. There are ways to prevent and protect while still getting that overall win or value out of this kind of implementation. But the world is messy, it's complicated, right? Hardware fails, so planning for long-term serviceability is a critical component. It's often overlooked. Having a cool pilot of an IoT project isn't the same as having a well-articulated goal, right? So you don't want to just, say if you're a listener and you're the IT director at your organization, you don't want to come to the business with, oh, we have this really cool idea. You need to kind of start with, here's how this adds efficiency. Here's how this might make us have better decision making based on what we do. And here's what I'm going to have to do first before I can even start. So there's quite a bit there. But I think the businesses that have started early adoption of this technology are already seeing the benefits. I think that, the complicated nature of new tech, whether or not to trust it openly at the outset, doesn't necessarily lend to progress every time. right? Sometimes you have to take a couple steps forward to accidentally take a step back with new
Right.
tech. So I would encourage listeners, look into it, see what might be think of the art of the possible for your business in relation to an additional technology implementation like
Right.
this. I'd say if you're in retail, there's probably some opportunities there. If you're like a small business that's a carpenter, right? And it's you and your brother making coffee tables or something on weekends, I don't know if you need IoT.
I
You
mean,
might,
you
but there's,
could, yeah, you
yeah,
could.
yeah,
I mean, there's
you might
smart
not.
tools. There's
There
smart
are,
tools right now. Yeah,
it's
some
true.
smart tools. So who knows? But let's talk about innovation a little bit because when you're thinking about, I like something that you mentioned earlier is if you're the director of IT and you get a new idea, how do you balance that innovation with some of the things that you were talking about, like risk management when implementing IoT solutions? How could you balance that?
Well, I think a hypothetical always helps with this, right? So let's say I'm the director of IT for a small media company. We do commercials for local businesses or something. There's 10 of us in the organization. If I was the, director of IT or CIO, right? I would start with what problems does my organization face regularly, right? Is it something around like maybe for example there's a problem where they have to go out like on site to a place to shoot these commercials, right? And the batteries die on the cameras a lot, and it's not for lack of trying. It's not anyone's fault that the batteries are dying and then they go on site and there's this whole problem to solve about, well, we can't shoot because the camera's dead. Maybe there's some value there to add some sort of IoT device that connects back and shoots a signal out on the charging station for the batteries that says, hey, these are all charged and good to go. Or, hey, there's no batteries in the dock. So if you're about to go shoot a commercial, you might be out of luck. And that's all an imaginary circumstance. But I think when you make this kind of, how do I put it? If you're coming up with a strategy that involves new technology, there's an element of winning over the hearts and minds always. There's an element of winning over the number crunchers in the building. And you kind of have to compensate for both. But typically for a new implementation, it's always going to start with what problem are we solving? And if there isn't a problem to solve, it's probably not going to move. But if there is a problem to solve, how do you package up the argument for rather than against adopting whatever the thing is? And I think since a lot of companies are starting to look at generative AI more, right? Either locally hosted, getting a GPT, building it from scratch. I'd imagine a lot of the conversations that led to those happening for organizations that approach whoever had that conversation likely could use a similar methodology with IoT. It's just a completely different landscape of things to talk about. With Gen AI, you have data privacy concerns. You have, is it going to hallucinate and make us look silly? Is it well contained within our chosen location? Are people using it how they should? With IoT, it's where does the data it collects live? How do we keep things safe when we implement it? What problem are we solving? That's kind of how I would approach it if I was in someone's shoes. But another thing is reach out to an expert, find someone who's in this space. Maybe they'll consult for you, maybe they won't. Takes a
Right.
certain kind of resilience to recognize that I don't know if I have all the information I need to maybe take my organization down this path. So hopefully that's something.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Obviously, there's a lot of different components in the discussions that we hit on today. But obviously, if you're thinking about adding some sort of innovation around a process, like something simple as like what you were saying with your example there, you still have to look at possible outcomes. If it's going to be negative, how it could affect your company, et cetera. But still always have your head on a swivel, kind of try to look all ways at once, if you know what I mean. So speaking of looking ahead, before we go, what do you think the next phase of IoT will look like? Are we moving towards a truly smart ecosystem where devices not only collect data, but make decisions and act autonomously?
I think that is very possible for a couple reasons, right? As agentic AI becomes further refined and mainstreamed, right? Because currently it's sort of in this either they've built it for you, and like if you have a chat GPT sub, right, there's that whole agents tab and you can create your own. The ones that they provide are really good, But I think it will get very interesting to see how IoT and Gen AI and agentic AI specifically will interact with each other, and how that could,
Mhm.
take it from not just a monitoring, sensing, and, embedded data gathering mechanism, but also to a decision making and actioning standpoint, right? So, like, I'm going to put a crystal ball in front of me, right? I'd imagine sometime in the next 10 years, right, there's going to be this overwhelmingly large push for many things that we see today as manual exercises that either require a person, require a technology, or require some sort of regular maintenance being fully automated and removed from humanity's task list, for lack of a better
Yeah.
term.
I mean, I can think of one of those right now that sorry to interrupt, that does happen. And I don't mean to give a shout out to any companies out there, but Amazon basically does this for you. If you've ever purchased anything through their grocery department, their
Mhm.
Amazon groceries, they'll basically sort of quasi tell you, hey, it's been, I don't know, 2 weeks since you ordered milk. You might have run out. Do you want us to get this for you? And so, I mean, I know it's similar, but not, but it's that
Well,
sort of
it's missing that
automation.
last step, right? Where it
Yeah,
purchases it for you.
for you. Exactly.
Yeah, that's the final,
I,
I don't know,
I don't,
tic-tac-toe square, right?
exactly. And to me, it's not that it's not there. I think it's that they're still giving people the option to opt in or out if
Mhm.
they want this or not, because you still have it on the things that you can actually do the subscribe and save. If you're purchasing something that you do know that you're going to, purchase again, whether it's a vitamin or something like that, then you click that. And I do know about this because my wife takes a certain vitamin that Amazon
Yeah.
sells. So every 6 to 8 weeks, she gets, account is under my name. So I get an email every 6 to 8 weeks that says, here's your next shipment for XYZ vitamin. And it's coming. So now she's already pushed a button that says, yeah, buy it for me every 6 to 8 weeks. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I feel like for some of these other things, like the example I mentioned about the groceries, is still sort of like in that, let's wait and see until he actually says, yes, I want you to always buy this for me.
Yeah. And I think, like, in the dream world that I live in sometimes with this stuff, right? Um, Imagine, like I said, 5, 10 years from now, maybe there are more smart cities. The agentic AI IoT combination with maybe some kind of, robotics would be traffic light goes down. IoT device sends a blip back to headquarters, for lack of a better terms, in the city to, we need a repair. Maybe some sort of drone is deployed that takes the broken one away and puts a new one in and reconnects it. That would be crazy, right? Or, there's all kinds of other cases where that can make sense. I think manufacturing gets the most attention in this world
Yeah.
because it's a job that most people don't love, right? It's not a
But
pleasant time moving boxes and stacking things and driving around a warehouse often.
I feel
Yeah.
like your example of traffic light is actually a very good one because, to use your own term, in my own little dream world where traffic lights have actual cameras that actually do something other than catch you when you're running a red light,
Yeah.
and they actually can sense or see when there is a huge traffic jam at, XYZ intersection, they could actually do something about it. Let's say the
Yeah.
traffic jam is coming from north south. What can you do about it? How can you make sure that traffic flows a little bit better? If we're talking about, right, that AI that's looking at this, that's, computing thousands of transactions per second, and it's looking at, oh, wait, there's a huge traffic jam at the intersection of XYZ. How can we make this better for the drivers? Send those signals out then to spread it out to the other different traffic lights in the area to make sure that traffic then gets flowing.
Yeah, and reroutes, and nobody's stuck
Exactly.
in a, 15-minute delay to even longer, right?
Exactly. So I think your
Yeah.
example there is actually, it's actually very clever. I think it's just a practicality to use
Yeah.
it. Like, when are we going to get traffic cameras, traffic lights that are actually smart, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, and a lot of people are, so like 5G recently happened, right? There's already talk
Yeah.
and hyping up around 6G. right?
Right.
How does
Settle down,
the
people. Settle
yeah,
down.
yeah, settle down. It just got out.
Yeah.
But how does the future network layer, support billions of devices instead of the millions we have today? Even though I'm sure we're already in the billions of devices, right?
I'm pretty sure.
How do we embed these with sensing, language models, spatial awareness, actuation through robotics, right? I think a lot of the future of this is going to come from historical sci-fi, right? Sci-fi
Mhm.
tends to inform on what actual science ends up trying to do quite often.
Yeah.
So I had to tie it all home back with that. But it's a really exciting topic. I know that the world's constantly changing, but I think there is power in technology helping make the world a better place. It's also complicated, difficult, not always cheap. It's
So
going to
gonna-
take some time.
Yeah, it will. But John, this, as you said, this is a great conversation. I'm sure we could probably go for another half hour, but we got to go. So John, thanks again for being with us on Ask Anything. It's always a pleasure to have you and every little bit of topic that we can. So we look forward to having you back soon.
Looking forward to be back. Have a good weekend, guys.
Thank you for listening in to this week's edition of Ask Anything presented by Moser Consulting. We hope you enjoyed listening to John Caviness talk to us about the Internet of Things. Be sure to join us next time as we dive even deeper with our resident experts and what they're currently working on. Don't forget to share your topics with us throughout social media. In the meantime, please remember to give us a rating and subscribe to our feed wherever you get your podcasts. Until then, so long, everybody.
Go.